welcome Charlotte Debeuf, Ph.D. student in science politics at the Leuven University in Belgium. She is part of the project Polycarbon research team under the supervision of Professor Katja Biedenkopf. The objective is to uncover, investigate, and understand the underlying mechanisms and conditions for the extension and contraction of the global system of carbon pricing governance. Within this project, her research is on carbon pricing in Africa and the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurine. I will share my screen. So if my sound is bad, please let me know. You can always interrupt me. So hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte, as you've heard, and I am studying carbon pricing in Senegal. So I'm part of the Polycarbon research team from KU Leuven in Belgium. So what is carbon pricing? It is a mitigation measure that tries to reduce carbon emissions. So it is a market mechanism that actually tries to discourage the use of CO2 technologies and encourages the use of green technologies. And this way it wants to help the transfer to a low carbon economy. So it is based on the polluter pays principle. So the idea is that as society, because of climate change, we are bearing the costs today. So we bear the costs of air pollution, of illnesses that are a result of that, of warming temperatures, heat waves, and dangerous weather events. So the idea is to transfer these costs to the emitters, and by this financial incentive, actually to motivate them, to encourage them to use green technologies and to stop using the very emitting technologies. So how does it work? There's very different carbon pricing policies, but today I will focus mostly on the traditional carbon pricing policies, what we would call them. So on the first hand, there's a carbon tax, which is an explicit price on carbon emissions. So this is, as the word says itself, a tax on per ton of CO2 emitted by mostly industries. Then on the other hand, there is the emissions trading system, which we also call cap and trade. And this is a system where a cap is predefined. So a cap of emissions, a maximum amount of emissions that can be emitted by, in this case, factories. And they have allowances, an allowance per ton of CO2 that they can emit. So if you look at the photo on the right side, the image, you see that factory A, so emitter A, is below the cap with its emissions, while factory B is above the cap, so this line. In this case, factory A can sell its allowances to factory B. And then factory B can emit more. But obviously this all costs money, as well as the tax. It costs money for these factories. So their goal would be to not pay this tax or to not pay these allowances and transfer to green technologies. So why is carbon pricing important? Why do we need it? Obviously, climate change is happening today, and it has been one of the very effective mitigation measures. Also, carbon pricing is mostly happening today at the national level, but it is encouraged to use at the regional level, at the international level, by the Paris Agreement, for instance. So Article 6, so 6.23 and 6.4 are, when they are ready, when they are defined, willing to install this regional, willing to encourage these regional or international carbon markets among different countries, among organizations, private entities, etc. And obviously, we will need mitigation measures such as carbon pricing to reach our sustainable development goals, especially Goal 7 on affordable and clean energy and Goal 13 on climate action. Now, who is using carbon pricing today? So this is a map from the World Bank, which maps all the implemented or considered carbon pricing policies. So these are only the carbon taxes and cap and trade systems that I've discussed, so what we call the traditional ones. So you see there's quite a lot of them that are thinking about it or that have it, and already, for example, provinces, states, for example, California. So it is happening already at the regional level, but mostly at the national level. We as the EU here have a cap and trade system for the whole of the EU as well. And today, so I will be focusing more on carbon taxes, and there's 30 carbon taxes implemented or almost being implemented around the world. Now, there's a lot of challenges as well with this measure because it is a financial incentive. So fairness is one of the big challenges. If a tax is raised or in some kind of levy, this can very easily become regressive, and in that case, fairness is very important. This links to Oriane's presentation on climate justice, which is a very important factor here as well. The alignment of policies and objectives is very important. It has to fit in a broader set of policies. It cannot stand alone. It has to be consistent with other policies. The issue of carbon leakage is very important. So when we would tax a organization or a factory here, they might just move their business to another country where there's no tax. So this is something that has to be considered. Transparency by the state is very important. Because you are raising money as a state, you have to be very transparent on its use and on the public, which eventually leads to public acceptability. So a lot of challenges. So there's a lot of that has to be looked into when a country wants to implement a carbon tax. Now, when we look at low and middle income countries, which will be more my focus since I'm focusing on Africa. So if you on this map, it's the same map as before, you look back at Africa, you see that South Africa has a carbon tax implemented since 2019, so it's very recent, and that Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire are considering implementing a carbon tax. So this is very recent as well. It's just since a few years, so they're still trying to see how they want to design it and how they want to implement it. In my research, I am for sure focusing on Senegal, and I might be focusing on Côte d'Ivoire as well, if it's feasible, because I'm not sure yet about that. So Senegal, why do they want a carbon tax? They announced the implementation so that they want to implement a carbon pricing policy. So they have announced it a few years back, and since then there have been studies helping them to design the tax to see what is feasible in their case. But there's obviously a lot of challenges as well, because on the first hand, most of these carbon taxes are installed or are implemented in countries that are rather developed, so global north more generally. So there's not a lot of research on how this could be implemented in low and middle income countries, or what the impact would be of such a measure. And the GHG emissions profile. So this could be a critical question to raise. So if you look at Africa as a whole, it emits 3.7% of global GHG emissions. So one could wonder, why do they even need mitigation measures, right? So they're still developing, they're still, like half of the people have access to energy. So is it even thinkable? Is it even useful? This is a very important question, and that's the reason why these measures have to be very, very customized and very precisely designed in low and middle income countries. But it is still useful because their emissions are still rising, and that's okay because they are in another stage of development right now. But the goal would be to limit the peak, to lower the peak a bit. So we will not prevent the peak, it will be there, but to lower it a bit, and it will be rather with a look to the future rather than now. So research on low and middle income countries. So as I've said a bit, there's not a lot of research. So that's one important point. Where there is research, there are a lot of questions as well. So questions on the feasibility of such traditional carbon pricing. There's a study, for example, from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, KAS, which has made this idea that GHG emissions and GDP per capita are very important factors in if you want to install a carbon tax. And they might both be too low in countries like Senegal, which can even endanger economic difficulties. So yeah. which is not likable, obviously. So that raises the question if a carbon tax is the right measure for Senegal. Is it the right carbon pricing policy? Now, there are studies that say, well, it can be, or it can be today, or it can be in the future with the support of capacity development. So I will go into that later. What is also what research says on carbon pricing policies is that external factors are very important and can have an impact on a country wanting to implement or a country implementing successfully a carbon pricing policy. So the geographical neighborhood is important. If a country, it appears by research that if a country next to you or in your close neighborhood has implemented one, you'll be more likely to implement a carbon tax too. If your previous colonizer has a carbon tax, you might be more likely to implement one too. So these two already might be the case for Senegal, as South Africa has one. Okay, it's not very close geographical neighborhood, but it is Africa. So for them, it is an example of an African country that has one. So why can we not do it as well? Previous colonizers, because France has one, or a kind of. And then the general international pressure can also lead to a country to adopt a carbon tax, as was the case in South Africa. Now, what's the issue in all of this? This is all good, obviously, because the policy is spreading. And this is what we call in the literature policy diffusion. The policy is spreading, so this is good. But with this international pressure or these other external factors, the policy might be of less quality because it has not full ownership, national ownership. So what I want to research, is the influence of countries, so other countries, international organizations, on Senegal's national carbon tax through capacity development. So what I've just said. Why capacity development? Because it, it is a way, I'll just first explain what it is. It is capacity development wants to enhance the capability of the capacity of a jurisdictions to take effective climate action. So it has 3 interconnected levels, which are very important and that need to be developed enough or need to be built up in order for a country or a region or a city to take effective policy action. So it is the environmental level, the organizational level, and the individual level. The environmental level means general things like economic growth, political stability, the political context, the policy environment, etc. The organizational level would be then the general organizational performance. So this will need to be strengthened. The general processes, the politics, the economic structures. So this is more the structural part. And then the individual level is the people. So what are their skills? What is their knowledge? And this all is interconnected. And capacity development can then be done by international organizations, mostly supported by developed countries as well. So capacity development in Senegal. So capacity development, in my view, leads to policy diffusion. For example, if international organizations like the World Bank, like countries like Norway or Germany that have a carbon pricing policy participate in these capacity development missions, they already have this policy, they have the knowledge on how to implement it, and they will try to pass it through to other countries through this capacity development, through the development of these organizations, the structures, the people, etc. So this will lead to policy diffusion, which is a good thing, obviously. So capacity development, when we look at it in Senegal, there's 185 missions and 8 are about carbon pricing. So there are capacity development missions in Senegal taking place on carbon pricing, so which will try to help them or enhance the knowledge about carbon pricing and how to implement it in their national contexts. So what I will try to do is to map all the actors that are active in these capacity development missions in Senegal. So through social network analysis. So social network analysis will tries always to map the network to understand relationships between actors. So this is just a random example, as you see here on the photo. This is what I will try to do in Senegal, map all the actors, see. So the bigger the round is, the more they are connected, the more central they are in this network. So to see who is active, who is the most active, who has maybe the more influence, and how did this lead to the implementation or to the decision to adopt a carbon tax, keeping in mind that it might not be the right carbon pricing policy for Senegal. So that was my short introduction to you. My research is very at the beginning, so if there's anything you'd like to contribute for feedback, you're always welcome to communicate it to me. And then I would just wanted to share our Twitter account from the Polycarbon research team, where you'll be able, for the next 4 years or 5, to follow everything that we do. So thank you.
I see a question in the discussion. Laurent, what do you think about that the idea of inventing a property right to pollute is effectively a privatization of air, which is a moral problem given the growing importance of wealth inequality?
But do you mean, Laurent, that the ETS or the cap and trade is this kind of system? Because
no, I was talking that if you invent a business of carbon, it means that you invent a privatization of the air. Yeah. And I said that, in fact, this is a moral problem. And it underlines especially a difference between rich country and poor countries. That's just a reflection, because there is not a consensus about this device to sell carbon, I mean.
Yeah, difficult. I think
it's not an easy question, but
no, but I think what you say is essentially what has been happening for all these years, right? So in the global north, factories have been popping up. We have been polluting so much. So kind of what you say, like privatizing the air, while others could not or didn't have the ways to. So this created this inequality. But I think that's why we realize that today it is so important that we stop doing that and that we lower our emissions. So I think it has never kind of been created. That was just the way it was, and that we realized at some point, like, oof, this is not okay, so we should stop doing that. And that's why we have been lowering our emissions and finding these systems like carbon pricing that really puts this incentive on them and making them pay money for everything that they are polluting, because it is not fair. If that answers your question.
Yes, it's a discussion. There is not an answer. Thank you very much. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
Charlotte, we have another question. Which is, Senegal seems to think about carbon schemes due to international external pressure. I would imagine that other African countries are also suffering from the same international pressure. So why is Senegal taking a different approach compared with other African countries and considering entering into carbon schemes? If you want to read it again, I invite you to read to check Slack.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, this is a very good question. So what I am thinking right now is that they are under international pressure, and that I hear myself. Yeah, okay. So that they are implementing this measure because there is this international pressure. I haven't proven it, obviously. So this is kind of what I want to look at because of all these external factors that I've showed. And I think they are one of the more developed countries in West Africa. So they definitely want to take action, which is super good. But so it's still to see if they will implement it. So maybe they decide not to. And if there is this international pressure, then hopefully other organizations or like the World Bank or so can act fast and make sure that this policy is right for them without being on my side Eurocentric or anything. So this, yeah. But it is a good question, and I don't know. So this is what my research is about and what I find interesting as well. And these are now hypotheses, so it's difficult to say that if it's definitely true. Yeah, we'll see, I guess. I think.
Charles, we have another question. Yeah, from Alimou. It's in French, so we'll translate it
No,
for you.
No, it's okay.
So, do you think the carbon tax is a good solution for African countries? And you need to take into account the final consumer.
Well, this is the big question. So I'm, for now, not an expert on looking at the whole national context, on having like one. I cannot count my, like do the math myself if the emissions are okay, if the economy is okay. But from what I've read up till now, I don't think that traditional carbon pricing might be the solution. So there has been a study on Ethiopia where they found that if there would be a carbon tax on just fossil fuels, it would, like the GDP would still grow, but at a lower rate. And it would lead to job losses in rural areas because of this tax. So this is obviously not good news. And that's why countries have to seriously customize the tax to their local needs if they implement one, and to make sure that it doesn't impact the poorer households, but that it impacts the industry, that can bear the tax. But then the question is if they can also even bear the tax. So yeah, it's very difficult. But then I think they should definitely keep their minds open to non-traditional carbon pricing. So this, I didn't discuss this today, but there's a lot of other things that can be done. So a lot of other options that might be more suited for them.
Okay. Oh, and Charles, I have a quick question for you. Do you know the effectiveness of carbon taxes on the emission of carbon? Like, if I increase by 10% carbon taxes, by how much I will decrease if there is any impact on carbon? Because you know, when you check the carbon emission in the US, in France, it's high, but it's not that high compared to China or India.
Yeah.
So and all those studies, they studied that look at the effectiveness or the relationship between carbon taxes and carbon emission. Is it in developed countries or any other studies in developing countries? Because so far the developing countries probably emit more carbon than developed countries. And how is the difference in effectiveness, if there is any effectiveness?
Yeah, so there's definitely effectiveness. So it lowers the emissions. That has been proven in these contexts of countries that have it for a long time. Now, the issue often is that when there is a carbon tax, it is way too low. So the rate would be at maybe $10 per ton, while studies have shown that it should be today at maybe 100 euros per ton or dollars. So, I mean, this is also, okay, these taxes are there, but are they effective? Maybe not, because of the design. So if the prices are raised, which is often done, so when a tax is implemented, it's not too high yet, so everybody gets to know it, to be at ease, and then they start hiring the price over time. And it should be, I think in Norway, it's about like, or Sweden, it's $120, but this is nowhere else. It's way too low and very in most of the jurisdictions. And yeah, of course, developed countries, but this is then, I guess, we come back to the whole common but differentiated responsibilities that they have emitted more in the past. So should they do more? I think on carbon pricing, they have the money, they have the infrastructures to do it, they have the industries that can pay it. So I mean, yeah, if the EU or as the US, Canada can lower their emissions by using carbon pricing, why not?
We have another quick question for you, which is raised by Emily.
Yes,
I will
Emily,
read it
I read
loud
it.
and then you can answer it. So how about taxes and subsidies? We also we have also to take into account consideration that several African countries subsidize pollution fuels such as diesel. Maybe a solution could be first to remove those subsidies and then instead of subsidize subsidize renewable, for example.
Yes, totally. I agree. So this has been shown as well that there's so many fossil fuel subsidies, diesel subsidies, and that these, should be removed before even taking other action. But then there's this question, very like poor households will not be able to pay fossil like diesel anymore, will not be able to, if their work depends on moving from point A to point B, they won't be able to do that anymore. So if they do that, they need to think about all the challenges I kind of mentioned here as well. So about the fairness, about the climate, just the regressive back, the revenue use, what they, because they will, I mean, get revenue use as a state, and they need to reinvest this money in technology, but also in these households to compensate them. So no, I totally agree, Midi. But they're not really doing it now. So yeah, we'll see.
Thank you very much, Charlotte.
Thank you.